primaries. President Joe Biden and other top Democrats want South Carolina to go first next year. State officials in New Hampshire, however, insist on keeping their first in the nation status and say they will simply move their primary to take place before South Carolina's. The outcome remains unclear. Governor Ron DeSantis of Florida is looking to shift his run for president into a higher gear after an early series of missteps. He spent the last 2 weeks rolling out an immigration policy and holding town halls with voters. But rather than correcting course, he stumbled again this week, raising questions about whether his campaign is headed in the right direction. Republican pundits say that his efforts to differentiate himself from Donald Trump without directly criticizing Trump risk leaving the Florida governor without a natural constituency in the primaries. And the long 4th of July weekend drew to a close, but without a spasm of gun violence, killing more than 15 people and leaving 50 others wounded in Louisiana, Pennsylvania, Philadelphia, Baltimore, Fort Worth, and other cities around the country. We saw kids as young as 7 years old shot and killed as a result of just senseless gun violence. In that case of the 7-year-old boy in Tampa, Florida, his grandfather was trying to shield him from bullets that were fired by two groups who were arguing over something as ridiculous as how one of the parties was driving a jet ski. Pleas from attorney generals and mayors around the country to enact some kind of sensible gun law seems to be falling yet again on deaf ear. Well, Mark Zuckerberg has taken the wraps off Threads, a clone of Twitter designed to lure people turned off by the social network's changes under owner Elon Musk. Threads may be the first Twitter alternative that really matters because it's built on top of Instagram's existing base of billions of users. And in swing states, with vulnerable Democratic senators up for re-election in 2024, the Democratic Party, that is already hammering likely opponents over abortion rights, even though most of those Republicans haven't yet decided if they're even running for office. The strategy could lend a hand to Senate Democrats who face a brutal map in 2024. Democrats must defend 23 seats compared with just 10 for Republicans. The number of U.S. women who died within a year after pregnancy more than doubled between 1999 and 2019, with the highest deaths among Black women, according to researchers. Now, there were an estimated 1,210 maternal deaths in 2019, compared with 505 in 1999. And to the researchers' surprise, Black women had the highest maternal mortality rates in some Northeast states. Well, the past 3 days were likely the hottest in Earth's modern history, according to scientists, as an astonishing surge of heat across the globe continued to shatter temperature records from North America to Antarctica. The spike comes as forecasters warn that the Earth could be entering a multi-year period of exceptional warmth driven by two main factors: continued emissions of heat-trapping gases, mainly caused by humans, that's us, burning oil, gas, and coal, and the return of El Nino, a cyclical weather pattern. You are listening and watching Areva Martin in real time, and I'm your host, Areva Martin. This is your one-stop destination for today's trending news, expert analysis, and my unfiltered opinions. This is hour 2 of Areva Martin in real time, and this is the hour where we go behind the headlines and we dig a little deeper and we go in on those stories that have people talking. And unless you've been living under a rock, one of the biggest stories that people are talking about is Justice Clarence Thomas. Now, some folks call him a sellout, an Uncle Tom. Folks wonder how a liberal lawyer from Yale Law School got accepted to Harvard, but decided to go to Yale, probably his biggest mistake. But a Yale lawyer, nonetheless, who was amongst the first generation of Black Americans who came of age in the Affirmative Action era, someone who benefited himself from the policy and someone who was once the chairman of the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. How did this person with this profile and this background become the most conservative, and I do mean the most conservative voice on the Supreme Court? We saw him sparring with Ketanji Brown Jackson, who did go to Harvard, which is probably why her opinions are so much more scholarly, informative, and on point. But he's literally calling her out by name and sparring with the newest justice over the issue of race. I have two experts with me today who are going to help us understand the journey that Clarence Thomas has been on, that and maybe help us better understand why he has become the most conservative voice on the Supreme Court. Excited to be joined by KBLA's host, Dr. Nii-Quartelai Quartey. You've seen him on this show before. He's going to be giving us his take and also the political ramifications of having someone like Clarence Thomas on the court. He is the senior political correspondent for KBLA. And also joining us in this hour is my Harvard Law classmate, law professor Anthony Farley. So when we come forward, Professor Farley and Dr. Nee are going to help us better understand the journey of Clarence Thomas. Stay with us. KBLA Talk 1580.
Follow the leader. KBLA Talk 1580. Follow the leader.
Be sure to follow us on Instagram at KBLA 1580.
Follow the leader.
Are you ready?
The station leading the way with exclusive interviews,
Follow the leader.
stimulating conversation, and intellectual discourse that empowers, enlightens, and informs.
Follow the leader.
Follow the leader at KBLA 1580.
We've got a lot to talk about.
Keep following the leader.
Follow the leader. Follow the leader. Follow the leader. Follow the leader. Follow the leader.
Gotta stay fresh, my house shot with a rest spot, shot with a rest spot, shot with a rest spot.
Have you visited us online for the grand opening of KBLA.store? For the best in new merch, gift ideas, books, media, and more, log on to KBLA.store. Be sure to check out our KBLA team favorites at KBLA.store today. That's KBLA.store for all the official merch on your favorite talk radio station, KBLA Talk 1580.
Bounce is back.
Here comes the brand new flavor in your head.
Race, social justice, sports, politics, art, music, culture. We do it all on the D.L. Hughley Afternoon Show. If you're not tuning in, then you are definitely missing out. It's the D.L. Hughley Afternoon Show, weekdays from 2 to 4 only on unapologetically progressive KBLA Talk 1580.
Like a brand new flavor in your head. Yeah.
This is a rather bold pronouncement, but we think we can back it up. If you come across a radio frequency anywhere putting more variety and more diversity on the air than KBLA Talk 1580, we sure would like to hear about your discovery.
You got to have vision.
You can search, but we are confident that you won't find more shows covering more topics, hosted by a more diverse and inclusive lineup of talkers than the squad we have assembled here at KBLA Talk 1580.
This is the time, brothers. This is the time.
We've got something for everybody.
That's right.
Health and healing, history and humor, issues and events, empowerment and entertainment, all in one station.
What's really going on?
Free enterprise, you dig?
KBLA Talk 1580.
Yes.
Oh yeah. We got a lot to talk about.
King Kong ain't got on me.
If you're not listening to Tavis Smiley weekday mornings on KBLA Talk 1580, you're missing out. Everybody wants to talk to Tavis.
That's one reason, by the way, why I'm so thrilled to have this conversation with you today. The three people I always most hoped would interview me were Phil Donahue, Studs Terkel, and Tavis Smiley. Donahue's retired, Terkel's deceased, so this is a real thrill for me. And the reason why I have such respect for what you do is you have a historically informed conversation of depth and detail.
Be sure to tune in to Tavis Smiley weekday mornings, 9 a.m. to 12 noon on your unapologetically progressive radio station, KBLA Talk 1580.
KBLA Talk 1580. Is the pen mightier than the sword?
We are back, and this is hour 2 of Areva Martin in real time, and I'm your host, Areva Martin, and we are going deep in this hour on Clarence Thomas. Who is he? Where did he come from? How did he go from being a liberal lawyer to this most conservative voice and what some folks call a sellout on the U.S. Supreme Court. I'm joined in this hour by Dr. Nii-Quartelai Quartey. He is the KBLA National Political Affairs correspondent and analyst, and he's also the host of A More Perfect Union right here on KBLA on Sundays at 10 a.m. and then again at 10 p.m. And also joined in this hour by Harvard-trained lawyer and Albany Law School professor Anthony Farley. Thanks to both of you for joining me. I think folks think Clarence Thomas came out the womb being the conservative voice that he is, and his history tells a very different story. I'll start with you, Dr. Nee. What does your research tell us about the journey that Clarence Thomas has been on? And, you don't have to go back to elementary school, but he did get accepted into major law schools, Harvard and Yale included, and started law school at about the same time that schools like Harvard and Yale were taking into account someone's racial and race and ethnicity in their admissions policies. And he benefited from those policies, yet he was one of the biggest voices overturning affirmative action in college admissions last week. So tell us about his journey.
Yeah, I mean, I think what most people might be surprised to learn about Clarence Thomas is that his life story is not all that different from people that we know, people that might be in our own families, people that might be in our own networks. You know, he had a very challenging childhood. He grew up poor. His mother sent him to live with his grandfather in Georgia, a grandfather who was abusive. You know, there are biographers that say that those were some of the worst days of Clarence Thomas's life, that is life with his grandfather, where it didn't take much to get a beat down in that household. And he really sort of found some level of solace in the Catholic Church as an altar boy. There were a number of nuns that really took to him and really challenged him. This is somebody that once upon a time in their college dorm room had a poster of Malcolm X. This is somebody that attended Black Panther Party protests in Boston, somebody who was pained, greatly pained, as was so many folks in our families and in our communities at the murder of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And so there's so much in his history that might make you think that he would be a different kind of activist Supreme Court justice than he has showed up to be. And I think that's a part of what is so troubling. That's part of the reason why so many folks, when they think of Justice Clarence Thomas, they think of the character of Stephen from Django Unchained. They think of somebody that has a very thick and serious disdain for their people, for women. And let me just add this, his being at odds with affirmative action didn't start with this case. This has been a recurring theme throughout his career. This is a person who, after law school, when folks were getting hired at big law firms coming out of Yale, he wasn't getting those kind of offers. And he sort of suspected that it was because of a perception that he was the diversity hire, right? And so, instead of channeling that disappointment in ways to create more opportunity for us, somehow, some way, he decided to channel those opportunities into currying favor with conservative leaders like President Ronald Reagan, among others, that created a glide path to him getting appointed to the U.S. Supreme Court.
Yeah, let's talk, Professor Farley, about those days at Yale. I've read several reports that say that Clarence Thomas was admitted because of Yale's intentional strategy to have diversity in this law school class. They wanted to have 10% of the students to be African American. He chose Yale over Harvard, but that on that Yale campus, he never felt good enough. He despite how hard he worked, despite, how he did academically, he never felt like he belonged. He never really felt at home at Yale. And as Dr. Nee says, when he graduated, he didn't get the jobs at the big law firms, which is typical if you graduate from one of the top 10 law schools, particularly at Yale. And he thought it was because he was the affirmative action candidate. And there's a story that he even put like a 15-cent cigar ban on his Yale law degree, basically indicating that it was worth nothing, worth 15 cents or less to him. What do you know about those days at Yale and how the rejection from big corporate law firms coming out of Yale may have shaped the man that we see today?
Well, I'm going to say this. It didn't shape him at all. There's, every empire is built on deceit. They all strive to produce a kind of human being who deceives himself. Like Clarence Thomas is the point at which the deceived start to deceive themselves. He has always been an Uncle Tom, listening to his master's voice, a hollow receptacle for the powers around him. Something happened to him in childhood, certainly. We can't be certain what it was, but we can be certain that it was traumatic, that something caused that young Clarence Thomas to give up the ghost and be filled, that empty vessel he now was, with all these horrors. So there's never been affirmative action in higher education. Every single elite university in the United States has a preferential admission scheme that favors white people as white people over non-whites. There are a million ways to do it, and they've all found the million ways to do that. Now, that's not what most people argue about affirmative action. Most people say it somehow exists. There's a lot of deception that goes into saying that it ever existed. First, we deceive ourselves into thinking that the universities know how to separate the future brilliant from the future less so brilliant, and they don't. They come up with lots of schemes. We could come up with a lot more schemes. They choose the schemes that give them a disproportionately white result. In fact, they aim the schemes to try to keep Black people out of class.
But let me ask you this, though, Professor Farley, are you denying that schools want to achieve some diversity? And I'm with you on the fact that they definitely prefer white students and figure out ways to let white students in, even those white students who aren't qualified. We've seen those stats about legacy students who get into these elite colleges just because of the money their families give or because they're athletes that otherwise wouldn't get in. But the reports are that at the time Clarence Thomas got into Yale, Yale wanted to have X number of students that were African-American, and he was selected because he fell into that category.
Well, let me say this. After April 4, 1968, when Black people set 200 American cities on fire in the wake of Martin Luther King's assassination, and there was talk of revolution in the streets. And white America, to its shock and horror, discovered that Martin Luther King, a man that most white Americans despised in 1968, was a centrist within the Black community. And that the young Blacks, Norman Mailer once referred to them as the deep purple Blacks, were with the Black Panther Party and other groups. In that moment where it looked like revolution was in the air, whether it was or wasn't is something historians can debate, but the establishment was shocked. In that moment, things started to open up, right? When they started letting us into these universities, the first wave of Black students there in large numbers shut them down, demanding programs like Black Studies, demanding Black professors, demanding critical mass of Black students. You can see those old pictures of our forebears walking around Ivy League campuses with machine guns and bullet belts and lists of absolute demands. That's what broke the spell of kind of absolute zero Black people in this firm or in this school or in this institution. So they let some of us in after that. And in the 90s, that might have included Clarence Thomas. I just don't want, I want to push back against the idea that these schools had to drop any standards that were real in order to populate them with Black people.
No, and I'm not suggesting that they dropped any standards, because Clarence Thomas obviously was more than qualified to go to Harvard, to go to Yale, to go to any of those elite institutions. I guess the whole point of the question is that Clarence Thomas got into this elite institution, and Harvard accepted there as well, because at the time these institutions purposely wanted to not have an all-white class. They wanted to have Black students, so they let in Black students, including Clarence Thomas.
Yes.
And go ahead.
And the way a Clarence Thomas gets in there, like the way he got over other Black people also applying, was presenting himself as the kind of Black person that will not be using his university or law degrees on behalf of other Black people. That was clear about Clarence Thomas at the beginning. If he ever had a Malcolm X poster in his room, it was because other kids were doing it, and it took their eyes off of him. It helped him blend in, and who knows whether or not he was reporting on his fellow students to the government. I don't have any evidence of this, but he does fit the COINTELPRO profile of the kind of Black student who reports on what the other Black students are doing. And a Malcolm X poster is needed for that. What a Malcolm X poster doesn't go with is a man thinking, oh, woe is me. I'm just not as qualified as these people around me. Like everyone is looking at me. Everyone is thinking that I'm affirmative action. That doesn't go with his supposed early Black nationalism or his adherence early on to the doctrines of Malcolm X.
Yeah, and let's go back to that, Dr. Nee, about this not getting a job, because something about that story doesn't make a lot of sense to me either, because, to the extent he maybe didn't get a job, I'm sure it wasn't because white folks thought he was some kind of tainted student that he had gotten into Yale. There had to be something else going on. So what does your research tell you? Is there anything else that we know about that period and how he ends up? I guess he ends up working for Senator Danforth from Missouri for a while, and then he goes to Monsanto, and then he ends up working for Danforth in D.C. So what do you know about that period of his so-called unemployment or inability to get a big corporate law firm job?
I mean, I don't know too much more than what I've shared. I know that there is a phenomenal PBS documentary that I encourage folks to check out. It's available on the PBS app. It's also available on YouTube. It will have you gripping your chair, as I was, with just so many insights around, who is this person that has presided on the U.S. Supreme Court for as long as he has, and I've just got to say that, when I think of Justice Thomas and his glide path onto the Supreme Court, I can't help but think about just the power of one's belief, right? And not just him, but Jenny Thomas, and how these two sort of found each other. I mean, Jenny Thomas wasn't his first wife. His first wife, was a Black woman. And according to biographers, he married her because that was the first woman that was nice to him.
The Black woman or Jenny?
The Black woman.
Oh, okay.
The first woman that was ever nice to him, right? And so I think it's important for us to sort of think about the psychology of Clarence Thomas, because it will help us to understand the psychology of similar folks, that are currently competing for leadership positions in our government. I mean, as I was learning more about Clarence Thomas's story, I couldn't help but think about folks like Herschel Walker. I couldn't help but think about, folks like Herman Cain. I couldn't help but think about, Black folks that conservatives have been very proud to sort of push out and use as an excuse against being held accountable for any racism, racial bias, or peddling in white supremacy.
Let's add Senator Tim Scott to that list. Let's not forget about him. Mm-hmm. So I know, Professor Farley, you've done a lot of research on what you call, the journey of people who become, what we commonly call as sellouts. What are the common threads in those people? Dr. Nee just rattled off Herschel Walker, Herman Cain, Tim Scott. That list can go on and on. Is there any common thread that you found that runs through all of these folks?
I think that there are a million sort of sewers that run down to the million sort of gutter pipes that run down to the sewer that is the sellout. There are a lot of ways to get there. The most convenient, maybe the easiest label is trauma. Early trauma doesn't mean you'll always end up there, but it means that you are vulnerable. You are broken. You're looking around for something to feel fulfilling to you, and you don't find it where you are because the trauma happened where you are. So you might seek it elsewhere, and you might seek it in a particularly perverse way. Like if you end up filled with self-loathing, that self-loathing may turn into racial self-loathing. You may pick up from just the general atmosphere that, if you hate yourself for whatever reasons, the hatred of blacks is always out there, especially, in America. It's on every TV news show. It's on every entertainment program. It's in every magazine, every newspaper report. I think H. Rap Brown once wrote a book in 1968 called Die, N-Word, Die. He used the actual N-word, saying because he said that America was a set of institutions that all say that one phrase over and over and over again. If you hear it and you're broken, you may start saying it.
Right, start repeating that phrase yourself. Hold that thought, Professor. When we come forward, I want to continue this really enlightening conversation about the journey of Clarence Thomas from Yale Law School to the most conservative voice on the U.S. Supreme Court. Stay with us, KBLA Talk 1580.
Follow the leader. KBLA Talk 1580. Follow the leader.
Be sure to follow us on Instagram at KBLA 1580.
Follow the leader.
Are you ready?
The station leading the way with exclusive interviews,
Follow the leader.
stimulating conversation, and intellectual discourse that empowers, enlightens, and informs.
Follow the leader.
Follow the leader at KBLA 1580.
We've got a lot to talk about.
Keep following the leader.
Follow the leader. Follow the leader. Follow the leader. Follow the leader. Follow the leader.
Gotta stay fresh, my house shot with a rest spot.
Have you visited us online for the grand opening of KBLA.store? For the best in new merch, gift ideas, books, media, and more, log on to KBLA.store. Be sure to check out our KBLA team favorites at KBLA.store today. That's KBLA.store for all the official merch on your favorite talk radio station, KBLA Talk 1580.
Bounce is back.
Here comes the brand new flavor in your head.
Race, social justice, sports, politics, art, music, culture. We do it all on the D.L. Hughley Afternoon Show. If you're not tuning in, then you are definitely missing out. It's the D.L. Hughley Afternoon Show, weekdays from 2 to 4 only on unapologetically progressive KBLA Talk 1580.
Like a brand new flavor in your head.
This is a rather bold pronouncement, but we think we can back it up. If you come across a radio frequency anywhere putting more variety and more diversity on the air than KBLA Talk 1580, we sure would like to hear about your discovery.
You got to have vision.
You can search. We are confident that you won't find more shows covering more topics, hosted by a more diverse and inclusive lineup of talkers than the squad we have assembled here at KBLA Talk 1580.
This is the time, brothers. This is the time.
We've got something for everybody.
That's right.
Health and healing, history and humor, issues and events, empowerment and entertainment, all in one station.
What's really going on?
Free enterprise, you dig?
KBLA Talk 1580.
Yes.
Oh yeah. We got a lot to talk about.
King Kong ain't got on me.
If you're not listening to Tavis Smiley weekday mornings on KBLA Talk 1580, you're missing out. Everybody wants to talk to Tavis.
That's one reason, by the way, why I'm so thrilled to have this conversation with you today. The three people I always most hoped would interview me were Phil Donahue, Studs Terkel, and Tavis Smiley. Donahue's retired, Terkel's deceased, so this is a real thrill for me. And the reason why I have such respect for what you do is you have a historically informed conversation of depth and detail.
Be sure to tune in to Tavis Tavis Smiley. Weekday mornings, 9 a.m. to 12 noon on your unapologetically progressive radio station. KBLA Talk 1580.
KBLA Talk 1580. Is the pen mightier than the sword?
They say the pen is mightier than the sword. At KBLA Talk 1580, we not only have a lot to talk about, we have a lot to write about. Politics, relationships, business, empowerment, and culture. The all-star roster at KBLA Talk 1580 has you covered.
That's what it's all about.
Be sure to follow us on all our socials for our latest book releases, op-eds, essays, and commentaries from our hosts. And, of course, download the KBLA 1580 app as we strive to remain your most trusted, credible, and reliable source for the issues you care about. This is unapologetically progressive. KBLA Talk 1580.
What up, baby?
Tell me I'm the boy and girl. I'm young, gifted, and black.
At KBLA Talk 1580, we do more than just talk.
Hey there, I'm Jared Hill, president of the National Association of Black Journalists of Los Angeles, and I just want to say thank you for the benevolent $10,000 donation and scholarships for the next generation of black journalists.
And I'm Haywood Galbraith, photojournalist and founder of the Minority Photojournalism Institute. Thanks, KBLA, for your generous $10,000 scholarship gift to help us train the next generation of black photojournalists.
Congratulations to all the students who will benefit from the scholarship dollars raised at our Black History Month luncheon, honoring black legends in LA media. When we come forward at KBLA Talk 1580, we're bringing everybody with us. Everybody with us. Everybody with us. Everybody with us.
Connection established.
Access granted.
In a survey conducted by the public opinion research firm Eviderus, KBLA Talk 1580 consistently emerged as the station of choice for black audiences in the Los Angeles media market and beyond. The survey also revealed that the vast majority of black audiences are concerned about the lack of black-owned media and are more likely to listen to talk radio that focuses on issues that impact the black community. For some reason, the other talk stations haven't quite figured that out.
If you think about KFI, well, KFI only has like a 3% black listenership. 3%. So there's a good 97% out there to support a station like KBLA.
At KBLA Talk 1580, we've got your black. Your black. Your black.
Follow the leader.
KBLA Talk 1580.
Follow the leader.
Be sure to follow us on Instagram at KBLA 1580.
Follow the leader.
Are you ready?
The station leading the way with exclusive interviews,
Follow the leader.
stimulating conversation, and intellectual discourse that empowers.
You're listening to Areva Martin in real time, and I'm your host, Areva Martin, and we are talking about the journey of Clarence Thomas from Yale Law School graduate to the most conservative voice on the Supreme Court. And I'm joined in this hour by Harvard-trained lawyer and Albany Law School professor Anthony Farley, who's done a lot of research not only on Clarence Thomas, but other African Americans who are commonly referred to as sellouts or Uncle Toms. Also in this hour, Dr. Nii-Quartelai Quartey is here. He's the KBLA National Political Affairs analyst and host of A More Perfect Union right here on KBLA Sundays at 10 a.m. and 10 p.m. Now, we were talking about Clarence Thomas's marriage to Jenny Thomas, but he was married before, as Dr. Nee reminded us. There isn't much information about his first wife. We know her name is Kathy Grace Ambush. Reportedly, they were high school sweethearts who got married in 1971. They had one child, whose name is Jamal Thomas. They separated in 1981 and apparently divorced in 1984. Now, during the time that he was separated, a new woman entered Thomas's life. She's a retired federal prosecutor. Her name is Lillian McEwen. She wrote a tell-all book about her relationship with Thomas. This book came out in 2011. It's called DC Unmasked and Undressed, a memoir. And in her book, this is the ex now, she portrays Thomas as a binge drinking porn addict. She claimed that Thomas and her engaged in threesomes, sometimes involving his female colleagues. Now, all of this was reported in 2016 in the New York Post. Okay, Nee, we heard about some of Thomas' Clarence Thomas's sexual proclivities and his involvement with women during those Anita Hill, during his confirmation hearing, Senate confirmation hearing when Anita Hill, now Professor Hill, testified. What did the documentary you saw say about this ex-girlfriend in this tell-all book?
Yeah, I mean, there were definitely references to, his proclivities and struggles around drinking. There were references to him drinking to the point where his personality sort of changed. He would become more aggressive. And so, no surprises there. But what's so interesting is, a lot of the accusations that were leveled against Justice Kavanaugh during his confirmation hearing related to his drinking, his judgment, though when he was younger, right? Very similar accusations have been made against, Justice Thomas in terms of some of his drinking habits and some of his behavior. And so I think part of what we are learning about our justices is not really inspiring a whole lot of confidence that these folks are really interpreting the law fairly. It really feels as if Justice Thomas has had an axe to grind for a very long time, and an axe to grind that's motivated by personal struggles, personal circumstances, but also hardline political views. Justice Clarence Thomas has been caping for conservative white folks for a very long time. That seems to be his audience. Don't just take my word for it. It's plain as day in the PBS documentary, which I highly recommend that people check out, where there are a number of folks that say that, Justice Thomas, really enjoyed currying favor among white conservatives. And these are the same people that represent the glide path that had led to him being elevated to the highest court in the land.
Yeah, what we know, Professor Farley, is that Thomas apparently was separated from his first wife and dating this former federal prosecutor when he started working with Anita Hill. And the now infamous proceedings of Thomas's nomination to the Supreme Court in 1991, we saw Professor Hill testify so powerfully that Thomas sexually harassed her when he was her supervisor at the Department of Education and Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, otherwise known as the EEOC. And we know he vehemently denied the accusations, Dr. Nee, the way Brett Kavanaugh did. And in fact, here's a quote from those hearings. He says, "I have been racking my brains and eating my insides out, trying to think of what I could have said or done to Anita Hill to lead her to allege that I was interested in her in more than a professional way, and that I talked with her about pornographic or X-rated films." This is before he categorically denied all of the allegations. We know that he was eventually confirmed to the Supreme Court in a 52-48 Senate vote. What is it, Professor Farley, about those hearings, those infamous confirmation hearings, I should say, that the senators should have learned, including our now sitting president, that they didn't?
Well, I don't know if they were actually ignorant of what kind of man they were supporting. I don't think that there were any people who seriously doubted Anita Hill. I would say they all believed her. The question with certain conservatives is who has a right to object to being sexually harassed. And for conservatives, they just don't believe women have a right to object to sexual harassment. The conservative leader, Anita Hill, once said that virtuous women don't get sexually harassed. So if you are a woman and you complain about sexual harassment, then in the ears of a conservative, it just means that you asked for it, that you were a not virtuous woman. And so they get angry that you're bringing it up. And they get angry that they have to, in what their minds, technically lie about what was actually said, because they think you're putting it out of context. You being any woman they chose to victimize in this way. So look, Clarence Thomas was somebody brought up as a pet of these right-wing Republicans. When Senator John Danforth talked about his protege, Clarence Thomas, who had been his legislative assistant in the way back when, he said, oh, there's one thing strange about Clarence Thomas. It's his laugh. It's his deep laugh. It's a belly laugh. It comes from deep inside his body, and his whole body shakes when he laughs, and he smiles. Now, they're literally recommending him as a shucking, jiving minstrel. Never in the history of Supreme Court nominations had somebody's suitability for the position rested on the way they laughed and giggled and their body shook and they had a big smile. But Clarence Thomas is a man, you know, despite his claim to hating being labeled, his claim that he hated being labeled an affirmative action recipient, Clarence Thomas was a man who was happy to be described in minstrelsy terms by his own backers. In 1987, right, that was the 200th anniversary of the U.S. Constitution. Thurgood Marshall gave a talk where he said, hey, let's remember we're celebrating 200 years of freedom way too early because we, the people, never included Black people. We, the people, said the framers, meant the whole number of free persons. Black slaves, Thurgood Marshall reminded us all, were excluded from that we, the people, excluded from the vote, excluded from everything, so excluded that for even a century before the Constitution, as Justice Taney wrote in Dred Scott, we were viewed as having no rights that the white man was bound to respect. So when Thurgood Marshall did that, Clarence Thomas went out on a speaking tour funded by conservatives to talk about the incoherence of Thurgood Marshall, about how that didn't make sense, about how George Washington, who owned slaves, about how Thomas Jefferson, who owned slaves, about how all those framers who were either slave masters or people who broke bread with slave masters were geniuses and they were working for all of us and we should all respect them. That tour, blasphemous really, like an incredible act of treason against his fellow Black people, against everyone who believes in human rights, is what and made him the darling of the conservatives. He was willing to say that for his 30 pieces of silver. That moved him out of mediocre positions into big deal positions like at the EEOC and on the federal bench, and then to the Supreme Court. And it may have been what got him to Yale in the first place, because there is a whole lot of favor bestowed upon Black people who display themselves as soulless. Like conservative professors write positive recommendations for those people.
Yeah, when we come forward, Dr. Nee, I want to talk about those hearings, those bruising confirmation hearings. Some folks say he never recovered. And one of his former law clerks said that he intended to remain on the court until the year 2034 so that he could make the life of liberals miserable for 43 years. Stay with us, KBLA Talk 1580.
This is a rather bold pronouncement, but we think we can back it up. If you come across a radio frequency anywhere putting more variety and more diversity on the air than KBLA Talk 1580, we sure would like to hear about your discovery.
You got to have vision.
You can search, but we are confident that you won't find more shows covering more topics, hosted by a more diverse and inclusive lineup of talkers than the squad we have assembled here at KBLA Talk 1580.
This is the time, brothers. This is the time.
We've got something for everybody.
That's right.
Health and healing, history and humor, issues and events, empowerment and entertainment, all in one station.
What's really going on?
Free enterprise, you dig?
KBLA Talk 1580.
Yes.
Oh yeah. We got a lot to talk about.
King Kong ain't got on me.
If you're not not listening to Tavis Smiley weekday mornings on KBLA Talk 1580, you're missing out. Everybody wants to talk to Tavis.
That's one reason, by the way, why I'm so thrilled to have this conversation with you today. The three people I always most hoped would interview me were Phil Donahue, Studs Terkel, and Tavis Smiley. Donahue's retired, Terkel's deceased, so this is a real thrill for me. And the reason why I have such respect for what you do is you have a historically informed conversation of depth and detail.
Be sure to tune in to Tavis Smiley weekday mornings, 9 a.m. to 12 noon on your unapologetically progressive radio station, KBLA Talk 1580.
KBLA Talk 1580. Is the pen mightier than the sword?
They say the pen is mightier than the sword. At KBLA Talk 1580, we not only have a lot to talk about, we have a lot to write about. Politics, relationships, business, empowerment, and culture. The all-star roster at KBLA Talk 1580 has you covered.
That's what it's all about.
Be sure to follow us on all our socials for our latest book releases, op-eds, essays, and commentaries from our hosts. And, of course, download the KBLA 1580 app as we strive to remain your most trusted, credible, and reliable source for the issues you care about. This is unapologetically progressive. KBLA Talk 1580.
What up, baby?
Tell me you're the boy that girl. You are young, gifted, and black. I'm young, gifted, and black. And that's a fact.
At KBLA Talk 1580, we do more than just talk.
Hey there, I'm Jared Hill, president of the National Association of Black Journalists of Los Angeles, and I just want to say thank you for the benevolent $10,000 donation and scholarships for the next generation of black journalists.
And I'm Haywood Galbraith, photojournalist and founder of the Minority Photojournalism Institute. Thanks, KBLA, for your generous $10,000 scholarship gift to help us train the next generation of black photojournalists.
Congratulations to all the students who will benefit from the scholarship dollars raised at our Black History Month luncheon, honoring black legends in LA media. When we come forward at KBLA Talk 1580, we're bringing everybody with us. Everybody with us. Everybody with us. Everybody with us.
Access granted.
In a survey conducted by the public opinion research firm Eviderus, KBLA Talk 1580 consistently emerged as the station of choice for black audiences in the Los Angeles media market and beyond. The survey also revealed that the vast majority of black audiences are concerned about the lack of black-owned media and are more.
So, Dr. Nee, I know you want to talk about Ginny Thomas, and she should be talked about. She was actually married to Clarence Thomas when he went through those hearings with Professor Anita Hill. She gave an interview a couple years after the hearing, said some bizarre things. One of the things she said was that Clarence will give everyone a fair day in court, but I feel he doesn't owe any of the groups who opposed him anything. So I guess the question is, are we still paying for the humiliation he felt, the embarrassment that he felt he suffered as a result of Anita Hill coming forth and telling her truths? Apparently, according to some of his friends, he never has gotten over that. And we may all be paying a price, us liberals, us folks that believe in democracy, because he is on a 43-year mission to, take us out.
I mean, I think we may very well be paying a price, but I also think that we're experiencing him carrying the water of white conservatives, including the one that he is married to. Ginny Thomas has been, groomed, really following the footsteps of her mother to be a conservative activist for the ages. Her marriage to Justice Thomas provides her with an opportunity to advance that mission. She's been railing against women's reproductive rights. She's been railing against affirmative action. She's been railing against, government-funded child care and just a lot of the issues that folks on the left, and dare I say, even large majorities throughout the country, are in favor of, common sense, gun legislation, a ban on assault weapons, right? I mean, that is not her position. And she has found in Clarence Thomas somebody who, can be a a reliable vote. Dare I say, the center of gravity on the modern Supreme Court. We talk about this being the Roberts Court. No, this is really the Thomas Court. I fear that he will not relent, and that will be in part powered by, his ill feelings about the confirmation hearings, but even more than that, the brokenness, of this young Black boy that grew up to be, this young Black man that had the world ahead of him, but for some reason, maintain this chip on his shoulder that he believes it is his role to make everybody else here in the United States pay for it.
Yeah, how are we seeing some of the trauma that we've talked about? Clarence Thomas obviously experienced at some point in his life, the resentment that he has towards liberals, the resentment that he has coming out of those confirmation hearings. How are all of those things being reflected in the opinions that he has written over the years, Dr. Farley? Because remember the beginning of his tenure on the Supreme Court, he was very quiet. He didn't talk very much at all. He was very isolated. He was to himself. And now we're seeing this more emboldened Clarence Thomas, writing these scathing and fiery dissents. Talk to us about his opinions and what you observed over the course of his time on the Supreme Court in terms of how he's coming down on critical issues and what he's writing in some of these opinions.
Well, I guess we have to remember that I don't know that he's changed at all, but he is a person ashamed of who he is. He once explained to a group of school children on a tour why he never spoke from the bench during that initial 10 years of silence. He told them that he was ashamed of his Gullah roots, his Geechee sounding voice. That's the way it sounds in his ears. His voice sounds like the voices that you would hear in Pinpoint, Georgia. And Clarence Thomas, decided that people, when they hear that voice, don't hear it as intelligent. That's not actually even true, but because Clarence Thomas hates himself so much, he hates his own voice because he hears in it the sound of his people. And so bending his sounds and his words around the, slings and arrows of outrageous things they hurl at us helps him to escape his own voice. So in the beginning, he was just silent, but now the zeitgeist has turned, right? Now the Republicans aren't hiding or coding their hatred of Blackness anymore, right? The 1965 Voting Rights Act has been stripped away. We have people saying things that they never would have said before. These arguments right now on the terrain of anti-gayness are arguments that can also be used to undo any civil rights gains that Black people have and other non-whites have made. Right? Loving versus Virginia, a 1967 case that struck down the anti-miscegenation laws, the laws banning interracial marriage in some 16 states, a 1967 case, a case within memory. It was an unpopular decision to strike those laws down. Like most whites opposed striking those laws down. They supported laws preventing whites from marrying non-whites. That's under threat by Clarence Thomas's opinions. So we've come full circle. When Clarence Thomas was nominated, A. Leon Higginbotham, the great legal historian and judge, wrote an open letter to Clarence Thomas in which he asked Clarence Thomas to think for a minute, what is it that a Black conservative would want to conserve in American history? If the conservatives had won at any point in Clarence Thomas's life, he's born in 1948, right? The same year George Orwell wrote 1984. Clarence Thomas was born in 1948. If you'd conserved anything going on around his birth, he wouldn't have been able to go to the schools he attended. He wouldn't have been able to have the jobs he had. He wouldn't have been able to live in the places where he lived. He wouldn't have been able to compete in track and field like he did on equal terms with other people, dining in the dorms and staying in the same hotel rooms at the track meets. He wouldn't have been able to marry the women that he was married to. So the weird kink that is involved in that marriage, right? A black person and a white person married to each other, each of whom says that they're conservative and therefore they must support the segregationist regime that the conservatives all supported. Like, how are they married to each other?
No. Yeah, that's always a big question, because as they come for gays, as they come for women, as they come for marginalized people, you have to imagine in their brains, they know that Loving v. Virginia, as you just indicated, is the reason that they are allowed to be married. And if they go as far as, it appears that they are willing to go, they could not be married in this country. They don't want a man to be married to a man or a woman to be married to a woman. They couldn't be married to each other as a black man and a white woman. They must know that, Dr. Nee, but that hasn't stopped him from coming for rights that can jeopardize his own relationship.
Right, they must know it, but you know what? It's even more than their marriage. It is a political alliance, and we need to take it seriously. Conservatives are emboldened, they are energized, and they will be relentless in using every tool, legislatively and judicially, to remake America and turn back the hands of time.
On that note, I got 30 seconds. If you could give me real short, Professor Farley, I'll give you the last word.
I think what we're facing is incredibly serious. Nobody says the kind of things that today's conservatives are saying out loud without having the conscious intention to kill millions of people as soon as they can. Like, this isn't, we can use the word fascism, but we need to actually understand what it is we are saying and what they are saying to us and the history that it mirrors.
I think it goes back to that book you told us about, Die In, Die In. Okay, I don't like to end my shows on a somber note, but on that note, we are out of time. Obviously, this is a great big conversation. Got to have both of you back to continue part 2, part 3, and I don't know how many parts when we're talking about sellouts like Clarence Thomas, but we are all a lot smarter because of the both of you. Thank you so much, Professor Anthony Farley at Albany Law School, and thank you, Dr. Nii-Quartelai. Catch them on KBLA 10 a.m. and 10 p.m. on Sundays. I'm out. The next voice you'll hear is Robin Ayers and the Raw Report right here on KBLA Talk 1580.
Thank you.
This up the brand new flavor in your head.
Race, social justice, sports, politics, art, music, culture. We do it all on the D.L. Hughley Afternoon Show. If you're not tuning in, then you are definitely missing out. It's the D.L. Hughley Afternoon Show, weekdays from 2 to 4 only on unapologetically progressive KBLA.